The billionaire stared at his son's photo. Then a waitress said the impossible. Sometimes the person holding your greatest secret is the one you've never noticed before. Rain tapped softly against the diner windows as Ethan Caldwell sat alone in his usual booth near the back. The evening crowd had thinned. A few truck drivers lingered over coffee. A young couple shared a slice of apple pie near the jukebox. The old clock above the counter ticked steadily through the silence. Ethan barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on the photograph in his hand. The edges were worn. The colors had faded over the years. But the smile remained unchanged. Noah, 8 years old, bright blue eyes, a crooked grin. The last picture Ethan had ever taken of his son. His thumb traced the corner of the photo. Slowly, carefully, as if touching it too hard might erase what little remained. Across the diner, Claire Bennett balanced a tray of coffee cups and paused for the briefest moment. Her eyes settled on the photograph. The color drained from her face. She almost dropped the tray. A customer called for a refill, snapping her back to reality. Claire forced a smile, finished her round, took a slow breath, then walked toward booth 7. Ethan never looked up as she approached. The billionaire's expensive watch glinted beneath the warm overhead lights. The untouched coffee beside him had already gone cold. Claire placed a fresh cup on the table without speaking. Steam curled into the air between them. Ethan nodded absently. "Thank you." His voice sounded distant. Tired. Older than his 42 years. Claire swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot. She stared at the photograph again. The same face. The same eyes. The same boy she had spent years convincing herself she had imagined. Her heartbeat quickened. No, that wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Ethan finally noticed her lingering. He glanced up. Is something wrong? Claire opened her mouth, closed it again. Every instinct told her to walk away, to keep serving tables, to leave the past buried where it belonged. But the photograph wouldn't let her. The memory wouldn't let her. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. Inside, the diner felt suddenly still. Claire looked directly at the photograph, then at Ethan. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that made the billionaire's entire body freeze. "Sir." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Claire felt her pulse pounding in her ears. "I know this boy." Silence. Complete silence. The clock continued ticking. Somewhere near the kitchen, a plate clinked against a counter. Ethan stared at her as if he hadn't heard correctly. Then he looked down at the photograph. Back at Claire. His expression hardened. Hope and disbelief collided behind his eyes. "That's impossible," he said quietly. Claire glanced toward the rain-soaked window. Her voice trembled. Not with fear. With certainty. "That's what I thought too." Ethan slowly rose from his booth. The photograph remained clutched in his hand. "What exactly do you mean?" Claire's eyes filled with memories she had spent years trying to forget. She took a slow breath, then spoke the words that would change both of their lives forever. "Because I attended his funeral." She paused. The room seemed to stop breathing. "And 3 years later, I spoke to him again." Ethan did not blink. He did not move. The photograph remained suspended in his hand, as though time itself had stopped inside the diner. Rain continued tapping against the glass. The coffee steam drifted upward between them. But all Ethan could hear were Claire's last words. "I attended his funeral. And 3 years later, I spoke to him again." "No," Ethan said quietly. "That is not possible." His voice was calm, but his fingers tightened around the photograph. Claire understood that look. She had seen it before. The look people wore when reality and memory collided. "I know how it sounds," she said softly. "I told myself the same thing for years." Ethan studied her face. There was no excitement there. No attempt to impress him. No sign of someone inventing a story. If anything, she looked frightened by her own memories. "Sit down," he said. Claire hesitated. "Please." Ethan's voice softened. "Just tell me what you know." Slowly, she slid into the empty seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The old diner seemed far away now. The customers, the clock, the rain, everything faded into the background. Ethan placed the photograph carefully on the table between them. "Start from the beginning." Claire looked down at Noah's smiling face. A sadness crossed her eyes. 3 years after the accident, I spent 6 months volunteering at a children's recovery center in Montana. Ethan immediately frowned. "Montana?" She nodded. "Small place. About 40 miles outside Billings." Most people had never heard of it. Ethan leaned forward. Every muscle in his body felt tense. And Claire swallowed. One afternoon, a boy arrived with a foster family. He was quiet, polite, kept mostly to himself. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. How old? Maybe 11. The answer landed heavily between them. Noah would have been 11. Claire continued. The first time I saw him, something about him felt familiar. I could never explain why. Ethan stared without speaking. A few weeks later, he came into the art room while I was helping younger kids with drawing projects. Most children drew houses or pets. He drew the same thing every day. What? Ethan asked. Claire looked directly at him. A lighthouse. Ethan froze. The color disappeared from his face. Claire noticed immediately. You know it? She asked. Ethan slowly nodded. My wife and I took Noah to Cape Elizabeth every summer. His voice had become barely audible. The Portland Headlight was his favorite place in the world. Silence followed. Claire felt chills run down her arms. That is exactly what he drew. Ethan looked away. Out the rain-covered window. Somewhere beyond the darkness. Somewhere beyond 8 years of grief. Lots of kids draw lighthouses, he said finally, almost as if he needed to convince himself. Claire nodded. I thought so too. She reached into her apron pocket. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she removed a folded piece of paper. Old. Creased. Carefully preserved. Ethan stared as she slowly placed it on the table. That is why I never forgot him. He unfolded it. Inside was a child's drawing. A lighthouse beside the ocean. A small boy standing on the shore. And written in uneven handwriting beneath it were 4 words. Ethan's breath caught. Because those 4 words were something only Noah had ever said. A private family phrase. A sentence never shared publicly. A sentence that should have disappeared with his son 8 years ago. The paper trembled in Ethan's hands. He read the sentence again. Then again. 4 simple words written in a child's uneven handwriting. 4 words that no reporter had ever published. No investigator had ever documented. No friend had ever heard. It had been a private game between a father and his son. A phrase Noah invented when he was 6 years old whenever they visited the lighthouse in Maine. Ethan remembered the salty wind, the crashing waves, the way Noah would run ahead across the grass and turn back laughing. The light remembers home. That was the sentence on the drawing. Ethan slowly lowered the paper. His throat tightened. For years he had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and solved problems that seemed impossible. Yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. Claire looked down at the drawing. He gave it to me. Ethan stared at her. You are absolutely certain? I have never been more certain of anything. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking across the diner windows in silver lines. Inside, the silence between them felt heavier than the storm. Ethan looked back at the drawing. A memory surfaced. Noah sitting on his shoulders during a summer afternoon. His small hands gripping Ethan's hair. His laughter carried by the ocean breeze. For a moment Ethan could almost hear it again. Then reality returned. 8 years. 8 years since the accident. 8 years since the funeral. 8 years of waking up every morning with the same emptiness. Tell me everything, Ethan said. Claire nodded slowly. His name at the center was Daniel. Ethan frowned immediately. Daniel. That is what everyone called him. Claire folded her hands together. But he never fully responded to it. Ethan listened carefully. Every detail mattered now. Sometimes he seemed distracted when people used that name. Like he was trying to remember something else. Claire's eyes drifted toward the rain-covered glass. He was a good kid. Quiet. Thoughtful. He spent hours drawing. Mostly lighthouses. Oceans. Boats. Things connected to the coast. Ethan felt another chill. Noah had always loved the ocean. Claire continued. One day I asked him why he always drew the same lighthouse. What did he say? Ethan asked. Her voice softened. He said someone important was waiting there for him. Ethan closed his eyes. A sharp ache moved through his chest. Claire waited before continuing. I thought he was talking about a dream. Or maybe a memory from before he entered foster care. Ethan opened his eyes again. Foster care. Claire nodded. That was what everyone believed. The family caring for him said he had gaps in his memory after an accident years earlier. Ethan's pulse quickened. Every piece seemed to fit too perfectly. Yet part of him remained terrified to believe it. Hope was dangerous. Hope could break a person all over again. Claire reached into her apron once more. Ethan noticed her hesitation. There is something else, she said softly. Something I have carried for 3 years because I never knew who to give it to. From her pocket, she carefully removed a small silver object wrapped in tissue paper. Ethan stared as she slowly unfolded it. The moment he saw it, the color drained from his face. Because lying in Claire's hand was Noah's lighthouse charm bracelet, the one Ethan himself had given his son on his 7th birthday. For several seconds, Ethan could not breathe. The tiny silver bracelet rested in Claire's palm beneath the warm diner lights. The lighthouse charm dangled gently, reflecting flashes of silver each time the storm illuminated the windows outside. Ethan knew every scratch on it, every detail. He had spent nearly an hour choosing it 8 years ago. Noah had worn it everywhere, to school, to family vacations, even to bed despite repeated reminders to take it off. Ethan slowly reached forward. His fingers trembled as he touched the bracelet. The metal felt cold, real, familiar. His eyes filled with emotion he had spent years trying to control. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Claire carefully folded the tissue paper back. "The last day I saw him." Ethan looked up immediately. "Tell me." Claire nodded. Her voice remained soft. It was a Saturday afternoon. The center was hosting a small community picnic. Nothing special, just games for the kids and food donated by local businesses. She smiled faintly at the memory. Most of the children were running around. But Daniel stayed near the lake with his sketchbook. Ethan listened without blinking. I sat beside him for a while. We talked about his drawings, about the lighthouse. Claire glanced toward the bracelet. Then he asked me a strange question. Ethan leaned forward. "What question?" He asked if people could forget who they were and still belong somewhere. The words landed heavily between them. Ethan stared at the table. Noah had always asked questions like that. Questions too deep for his age. Questions that lingered long after the conversation ended. Claire continued. "I told him that belonging is not something you lose. Sometimes it just takes time to find your way back." Ethan swallowed hard. Outside, the rain softened slightly. The storm seemed to be moving farther into the distance. "Then what happened?" he asked. Claire looked down. He smiled. A small tear appeared in the corner of her eye. "And he said that someone important was looking for him." Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment, the diner disappeared. He imagined Noah sitting beside a quiet Montana lake. Older, taller, alive, waiting for answers neither of them could find. Before he left that day, he handed me the bracelet. Claire carefully placed it on the table. I told him it looked valuable, that he should keep it. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the charm, but he said he wanted me to hold on to it. Claire's voice grew quieter. "He told me that if the person from the lighthouse ever came looking, I would know what to do." Silence followed. The clock above the counter ticked steadily. Ethan felt years of certainty beginning to unravel. The funeral, the reports, the investigations. Everything he had accepted as truth suddenly seemed fragile. Then a new thought entered his mind, one that made his pulse quicken. "Claire," he said carefully, "do you know the name of the foster family?" Claire hesitated. Her expression changed instantly. Hope faded. Concern replaced it. "That is the problem." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire looked directly into his eyes. 3 months later, they were gone. Ethan froze. "Gone?" Claire nodded slowly. The family moved without leaving a forwarding address. The center closed the following year. Most records disappeared during the transition. She took a breath. "For 3 years, I have been trying to convince myself it meant nothing." Ethan stared at the bracelet, then at the drawing, then at the photograph. For the first time in 8 years, he no longer felt grief. He felt something far more dangerous. Hope. Hope changed everything. 20 minutes later, Ethan Caldwell was no longer sitting in booth 7 staring at old memories. He was moving, thinking, planning. The same relentless focus that had built his business empire now locked onto a single objective. Find Noah. The rain had stopped by the time Ethan stepped outside the diner. Water still glistened across the empty parking lot beneath the streetlights. Claire followed him to the entrance, clutching her apron nervously. "You really believe he is alive?" she asked. Ethan looked down at the bracelet in his hand. The lighthouse charm reflected a small beam of light. "For 8 years I believed he was gone." His voice was calm, steady. "Tonight is the first time I have had a reason not to." Claire nodded. Ethan pulled out his phone. Within seconds, he was speaking to people across 3 different states. Attorneys, investigators, analysts, men and women whose careers existed to uncover information others could not find. He gave them one instruction. Find the foster family. Find the boy called Daniel. no matter how long it takes. By midnight, reports were already arriving. Ethan sat in the back of a black SUV parked outside the diner while screens glowed around him. Claire watched through the window as information flowed in from every direction. Property records, school registrations, medical databases, adoption filings, thousands of pages, thousands of names. Yet one detail continued appearing. Daniel, age approximately 11, arrived in Montana 6 years earlier with limited documentation, then vanished 3 years later. Ethan studied every file personally. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a breakthrough appeared. One investigator located an old volunteer photograph from the recovery center. The image was blurry, grainy, taken during the community picnic Claire described. Ethan enlarged the picture. His heart nearly stopped. There, standing near a picnic table with a sketchbook under one arm, was a boy, older than Noah, taller than Noah, but the eyes were unmistakable. Claire covered her mouth when she saw the image. That is him. Ethan stared silently. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Yet something else caught his attention. The boy was standing beside a woman. Mid-40s. Brown hair. Warm smile. No identifying information. No name attached. Just a face. Who is she? Ethan asked. Nobody knew. The investigators continued searching. Another hour passed. Then another clue emerged. The photograph contained a vehicle parked in the background. Part of a license plate remained visible. Most people would have missed it. Ethan's team did not. By dawn, they traced the plate to a woman named Margaret Holloway, elementary school teacher, widowed, resident of a small town outside Spokane, Washington. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Finally, a real lead. But before he could celebrate, another report arrived. This one changed everything. The investigator's voice grew cautious. Mr. Caldwell, there is something you need to know. Ethan straightened immediately. What is it? A pause followed. Then came the answer. Margaret Holloway never adopted any children. Silence filled the vehicle. Ethan frowned. Then why is she connected to him? Another pause. Because according to every record we can find, the boy was never legally placed with her. Ethan stared at the screen. Confusion mixed with anticipation. The mystery had only deepened. Somewhere between Montana and Washington, an entire chapter of Noah's life remained hidden. And for the first time in 8 years, Ethan was closer than ever to uncovering it. The sun was rising when Ethan's plane touched down in Spokane. The sky glowed pale gold beyond the mountains, but he barely noticed. He had not slept. Every minute of the flight had been spent reviewing reports, photographs, timelines, and records that refused to fit together. Across from him, Claire stared out the window in silence. 24 hours earlier, she had been serving coffee in a roadside diner. Now she was helping a billionaire search for a boy who might have been lost for 8 years. Neither of them fully understood how they had arrived here. Yet both felt they were moving towards something that had been waiting a long time. By mid-morning, they stood outside a modest white house on a quiet residential street. The lawn was neatly trimmed. Flower pots lined the porch. Wind chimes swayed gently in the breeze. Nothing about the place suggested mystery. Nothing suggested secrets. Ethan studied the address one more time before walking to the front door. His pulse pounded. Claire noticed. You do not have to do this alone, she said softly. Ethan nodded but said nothing. A few moments later, the door opened. A woman in her mid-50s appeared. Brown hair, kind eyes. The same woman from the photograph. Margaret Holloway. The moment she saw Ethan, her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. As though she had known this day would eventually come. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The wind chimes filled the silence. Finally, Margaret looked at Ethan and quietly said, "You are Noah's father." Ethan froze. Claire stared in disbelief. Margaret stepped aside. "Please come in." The living room was simple and warm. Family photographs covered the walls. Books filled the shelves. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. It felt like a home. A real home. Margaret invited them to sit. Ethan remained standing. Too anxious. Too overwhelmed. Where is he? Margaret lowered her eyes. Safe. Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Safe. The word echoed through his mind. Safe. For 8 years he had imagined every possible outcome. Yet somehow he had never imagined that word. Margaret folded her hands together. I have been expecting someone to find us eventually. Ethan's voice tightened. Then you know who he is. Margaret nodded. I learned the truth 2 years ago. Claire leaned forward. 2 years. Margaret looked toward a framed photograph resting on a nearby table. A teenage boy stood beside her, smiling beneath a bright summer sky. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Older, taller, but unmistakably Noah. The accident left him with fragmented memories, Margaret explained. For years he remembered pieces of things, but never enough to understand where they came from. Ethan stared at the photograph. Every feature felt familiar. Every detail. Margaret continued. Then one day he remembered the lighthouse. Ethan slowly sat down. The room seemed to tilt around him. Margaret reached for the photograph and gently handed it over. That was when he started searching for answers himself. Ethan held the frame carefully, his eyes filled with emotion. Then Margaret said something that changed everything once again. There is only one problem. Ethan looked up immediately. What problem? Margaret hesitated. Her voice softened. He does not know you are coming, and he believes someone else is his father. The room fell silent. Ethan stared at Margaret, trying to process what she had just said. He had spent 8 years believing his son was gone, then 24 hours believing he might still be alive. Now he was learning that Noah had built an entirely different life, a life that did not include him. Margaret noticed the pain in his eyes. You need to understand something, she said gently. The man Noah believes is his father is not a bad person. Ethan looked down at the photograph in his hands. The teenage boy smiling beside Margaret seemed happy, healthy, safe. Everything Ethan had prayed for during countless sleepless nights. Yet somehow that made this harder. Who is he? Ethan asked quietly. Margaret walked to a bookshelf and picked up another framed photograph. This one showed Noah standing beside a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap and a warm smile. They were fishing beside a lake. The sunlight reflected across the water. His name is David Mercer, Margaret said. He teaches science at the local high school. Claire glanced at the picture. He raised Noah? Margaret nodded. For the last 6 years. Ethan studied the image. There was nothing remarkable about David Mercer. No private jets. No billion-dollar companies. No headlines. Just an ordinary man. Yet Noah's smile in the photograph seemed completely genuine. Margaret sat down again. David never lied to him intentionally. He believed he was protecting a child who had already been through enough confusion. Ethan remained silent. His expensive watch caught the afternoon light. Time. 8 years of it. Gone. Lost. Unrecoverable. Margaret continued. 2 years ago, Noah started remembering more details from before the accident. The lighthouse. The ocean. A man carrying him on his shoulders. Ethan felt emotion tighten in his chest. Me. Margaret nodded. But memories are complicated. Fragments do not always tell the whole story. Claire listened carefully. So Noah knows something is missing? Yes, Margaret replied. He has been searching for answers. But he does not know where those answers lead. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. Children rode bicycles down the quiet street outside. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal life continued. Meanwhile, his entire world had changed. Where is he now? Ethan asked. Margaret checked the clock. School ended about 30 minutes ago. Ethan turned immediately. His pulse quickened. Can I see him? Margaret hesitated. The pause felt endless. Finally she answered. You can. Hope surged through Ethan's chest. Then she added, but not as his father. Ethan froze. What? Margaret stood slowly. If you walk into his life today and tell him everything at once, you may lose the chance to know him at all. Claire understood immediately. Margaret was not protecting secrets. She was protecting Noah. Then who am I supposed to be? Ethan asked. Margaret gave a small, sad smile. A stranger. The word landed heavily. A stranger. To the boy whose photograph he had carried for 8 years. Margaret picked up her car keys from the kitchen counter. There is a school concert tonight. Noah plays piano. Ethan felt his breath catch. Noah had loved the piano when he was younger. You can attend, Margaret said softly. You can see him, hear him, be in the same room. She looked directly into Ethan's eyes. But for now, you must let him meet you before you ask him to remember you. That evening, Ethan sat alone in the last row of the high school auditorium. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as parents filled the seats. Programs rustled. Children laughed backstage. Warm lights spilled across the stage curtains. It was an ordinary school concert. Yet for Ethan, it felt like the most important moment of his life. Claire sat beside him. Neither spoke much. There was nothing left to say. 8 years of grief had brought them here. The stage lights dimmed. Applause rippled through the room. Students began performing one by one. A choir, a violin solo, a jazz ensemble. Ethan barely noticed any of it. His eyes remained fixed on the side entrance near the piano. Then it happened. A teenager stepped onto the stage. The entire world seemed to stop. Ethan forgot to breathe. Noah. Older. Taller. Nearly 16 now. His hair was darker than Ethan remembered. His shoulders broader. Yet the familiar expression remained. The same thoughtful eyes. The same quiet presence. Ethan gripped the edge of his seat. For a moment, he saw the little boy from the photograph and the young man on stage at the same time. Noah adjusted the piano bench and sat down. The auditorium grew silent. Then his fingers touched the keys. The melody began softly. Simple, gentle, beautiful. Ethan felt tears forming immediately, because he recognized the song. It was not a popular piece. It was not something taught in schools. Years ago, Ethan had composed a simple piano melody for Noah while teaching him basic notes at home. A private tune. A family tune. One Noah used to play over and over until everyone in the house knew it by heart. Claire slowly turned toward Ethan. She saw the emotion on his face and understood. Noah remembered more than anyone realized. The music filled the room. Every note carried fragments of a life that had once seemed lost forever. When the performance ended, the audience erupted into applause. Noah stood and offered a modest smile before leaving the stage. Ethan remained frozen. His heart raced. His mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. He remembers, Ethan whispered. Claire nodded. Part of him always did. After the concert ended, families gathered in the lobby. Parents hugged children. Teachers congratulated students. The building filled with laughter and conversation. Ethan stayed near the back, uncertain. Then he saw him. Noah emerged through a side hallway carrying sheet music beneath one arm. Beside him walked David Mercer. The science teacher smiled proudly and placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. The sight struck Ethan unexpectedly. There was no resentment, no anger, only gratitude. This man had cared for Noah when Ethan could not. David said something that made Noah laugh. The sound reached Ethan across the crowded room. It was the same laugh. Older now, deeper, but unmistakably the same. Then something surprising happened. Noah glanced across the lobby. His eyes landed directly on Ethan. Just for a second, the crowd faded away. The noise disappeared. Father and son looked at each other for the first time in 8 years. Noah frowned slightly. Not in fear, not in confusion. Recognition. A strange feeling he could not explain. He continued staring. Then slowly he began walking toward him. Noah stopped a few feet away. The crowded lobby continued moving around them, but neither seemed to notice. Ethan stood perfectly still. He had imagined this moment thousands of times over 8 years. In every version, he knew exactly what to say. Yet now, standing face to face with his son, every prepared word disappeared. Noah studied him carefully. There was curiosity in his eyes. And something deeper, something familiar. Do I know you? Noah finally asked. Ethan felt his throat tighten. The honest answer was yes. More than anyone in the world. But he remembered Margaret's warning. He remembered the years Noah had spent building a life of his own. So Ethan simply smiled. No, he said softly. I do not think we have met. Noah nodded slowly, though he did not look convinced. That is strange. Ethan forced himself to remain calm. Why? Noah glanced down briefly before looking back up. You seem familiar somehow. The words landed gently, but they carried the weight of years. Ethan felt emotion rise inside him. Claire watched from across the lobby, her eyes filling with tears. David Mercer approached and placed a supportive hand on Noah's shoulder. Ethan immediately understood why Noah trusted him. There was kindness in the man's presence. Steadiness. The quiet strength of someone who showed up every day. David offered Ethan a polite smile. Friend of the school? Ethan hesitated, then answered truthfully in the only way he could. Something like that. David nodded. Well, thank you for coming. Noah worked very hard for tonight. Ethan looked at Noah. I could tell. Noah smiled modestly. The same smile from the photograph. The same smile from years ago. For the first time, Ethan realized something important. He had spent years mourning the child he lost. But standing before him now was not that child. This was a young man with his own memories, his own dreams, and his own life. The next few months passed slowly. Ethan did not force his way into Noah's world. He did not arrive with lawyers. He did not arrive with demands. Instead, he listened. He attended school events. He volunteered at community fundraisers. Sometimes he spoke with Noah for 5 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. A friendship formed. Then trust. One autumn afternoon, they sat together beside a lake outside town. The water reflected the orange and gold colors of the changing leaves. Noah skipped a stone across the surface. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Ethan nodded. "Anything." Noah stared across the water. "Why did you keep coming back?" Ethan thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because some people are worth waiting for." Noah smiled faintly. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. The kind that exists between people who no longer need explanations. Then Noah reached into his backpack. Ethan watched as he removed an old sketchbook. Inside were dozens of drawings. Lighthouses, oceans, boats, memories. Noah turned to the first page. There, carefully redrawn from memory, was the lighthouse from Maine. Beneath it appeared 4 familiar words. "The light remembers home." Ethan looked away briefly, overwhelmed by emotion. When he turned back, Noah was watching him, really watching him, as though pieces of a puzzle had finally fallen into place. "I remember now," Noah whispered. Ethan said nothing. He could not. Noah's eyes filled with tears. A smile slowly appeared. Then, after 8 years of silence, distance, questions, and hope, he spoke a single word. "Dad." The wind moved gently across the lake. Neither of them rushed the moment. Neither needed to. Some reunions happen in an instant. Others take years. And sometimes the people who change everything are not the powerful ones, but the quiet souls carrying a secret, a memory, or a simple act of kindness. Because destiny rarely arrives with noise. More often, it arrives quietly, carrying a cup of coffee and the truth that leads someone home.